October 29, 1923. A new nation was born from the ashes of the Ottoman Empire, the Republic of Turkey. But how did this colossal empire that ruled over 3 continents for over 600 years rise? And how did it ultimately collapse? Don't leave this video until you find the answers to these questions, because every detail I'm about to tell will be the key to the next one. The Ottoman story actually begins much further east in the Asian steppes. The Turks had been migrating for thousands of years. This people, advancing westward from Northeast Asia, reached the vicinity of the Altai Mountains in the 7th century. This region, where the borders of Russia, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia intersect, was the gateway for the Turks to the west. But the real turning point came later. Among the Turkic tribes living a semi-nomadic life around the Caspian and Aral Seas, the Oghuz stood out. At the end of the 10th century, a leader named Seljuk emerged. He separated his own clan from the main tribe and established an independent dynasty. This decision would change the course of history. Seljuk and his grandsons first headed to Persepolis. They adopted Persian culture and language. They embraced Islam. By the 1060s, they had reached the western Anatolian borders of the Byzantine Empire. Inevitable conflict began between the two powers. Everything changed when 1071 arrived. The Battle of Manzikert. The Seljuks inflicted a crushing defeat on the Byzantine army. This victory was not just a military success. The dominance of the Near East was changing hands. The gates of Anatolia were wide open. The Turks now began to settle in the lands of present-day Turkey. Over the next 2 centuries, the Seljuk Empire fragmented. Small Turkish states emerged. The strongest was the Anatolian Seljuk Sultanate. However, by the 14th century, it too had collapsed. Anatolia became filled with small principalities called beyliks. In this very chaos, a warrior leader emerged in northwestern Anatolia. His name, Osman. Definitive information about Osman's life is limited, but one thing is certain: the dynasty he founded would bear his own name, Ottoman. The century after Osman was shaped around one goal: to conquer the Byzantine Empire. Byzantium was once a dominant power in the eastern Mediterranean, but in the 14th century, only the southern part of the Balkans, Greece, the Aegean Islands, and a small piece of land in Turkey remained. Their capital, Istanbul, then Constantinople, was a city surrounded by the strongest walls of the Middle Ages. It had resisted sieges for centuries. The Ottomans advanced systematically. Nicaea fell in 1331. Edirne was captured in 1369. It was only 200 kilometers from Constantinople. It even served as the Ottoman capital for a while. Conquests continued in Serbia and Bulgaria. A brief period of internal turmoil occurred at the beginning of the 15th century. But when Mehmed II ascended to the throne in 1451, everything became clear. He would take Constantinople. He was determined to do so. April 1453, the siege began. It lasted 7 weeks. When the Ottoman army breached the walls, the course of history changed. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, died in battle. Interestingly, his name was the same as Constantine I, the founder of the city. He was the emperor who gave the city its name 1,000 years ago. May 29, 1453, Constantinople fell into Ottoman hands. This would now be the new capital. The Hagia Sophia Cathedral, built by Emperor Justinian 900 years ago, was converted into a mosque. For minarets were added. This was the symbol of Ottoman dominance. The conquest of Constantinople was just the beginning. In the centuries ahead, the Ottomans spread to the eastern Mediterranean, Middle East, North Africa, and the Balkans. In the 1460s, Mehmed II advanced rapidly. He took the Morea in Greece. He conquered the Empire of Trebizond in northern Turkey. Bosnia fell in the Balkans. When he died in 1481, he had expanded southern and eastern Turkey and conquered Albania. He even organized an expedition to the Crimean Peninsula. Ottoman presence was established on the northern shores of the Black Sea in the 1470s. His successor Bayezid II was also a powerful warrior. During his 30-year reign, he added new territories in Syria and the Levant. He seized control of the region by fighting with the Mamluk state of Egypt. He also consolidated control over the Aegean Sea by clashing with the Republic of Venice between 1499 to 1503. Venice controlled many islands and trade routes. Yavuz Sultan Selim ruled for only 8 years but accomplished incredible things. Between 1512 to 1520, he conquered almost all of North Africa. In 1517, he defeated the Mamluks at the Battle of Redania. Most of Egypt and Libya came under Ottoman control. Hayreddin Barbarossa Pasha, the ruler of Algeria and Tunisia, accepted becoming an Ottoman vassal in 1519. Perhaps the most famous Ottoman sultan was Suleiman the Magnificent. Magnificent Suleiman. He ruled for half a century between 1520 to 1566. During his reign, the Ottomans became one of the global powers. He completed the conquest of the Balkans. He advanced advanced with his army to the gates of Vienna. He besieged it in 1529 but couldn't take it. In 1522, he took Rhodes Island from the Knights of St. John. In 1551, he conquered Tripoli in North Africa. He expanded into the Arabian Peninsula and Iraq. By the end of his reign, Ottoman dominance had spread over an incredible area, from Hungary and the northern shores of the Black Sea to Egypt and Oman in the south. It extended from Algeria in the west to the shores of the Caspian Sea in the east. The secret of this success lay in the strength of the Ottoman army. Well-trained infantry, cavalry, and artillery units formed a perfect balance. The most elite unit was the Janissaries. These were people captured as children from the Christian lands of southwest Europe. They were forced to convert to Islam and then joined the Ottoman army under strict discipline. This made them an extremely effective fighting force. From the beginning of the 16th century, the Ottomans fought against Christian powers in Western and Central Europe for 2 centuries. This was a multi-front conflict. The first major struggle was for the dominance of the Mediterranean. The rival was Spain. At that time, Spain controlled southern Italy and the Italian islands. They led Christian alliances to stop the advance of the Muslim Ottomans. For decades, naval battles were fought between the Turks and the Spanish. 2 major clashes stand out: 1565 and 1571. In 1565, the Great Siege of Malta took place. The Ottomans tried to take the island from the Knights of St. John. The Knights had received the island from the Spanish crown as compensation for the loss of Rhodes years earlier. The siege ended in failure for the Ottomans. 6 years later, the advance into the Mediterranean was stopped by another Spanish-led Christian alliance. In 1571, a huge fleet was sent against the Ottomans. The Battle of Lepanto took place off the coast of northwestern Greece. More than 400 ships, 130,000 soldiers. The Ottomans were defeated. For the Christian powers, this showed that the Turkish threat could be controlled to some extent. For the Ottomans, it was just a change of focus. They turned to other parts of Europe. After defeating the Hungarians at the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, full control of Central Europe was within Ottoman grasp. Only the Austrian capital Vienna posed an obstacle beyond the Danube River. They had failed in 1529. Under the leadership of Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, a new siege was launched on Vienna in 1683, an army of 150,000 men, but they couldn't take the city. On September 12th, a Christian Holy League relief force led by Polish King John III Sobieski arrived. The largest cavalry charge in history took place. 18,000 horsemen charged into the Turkish camp. The Ottomans were routed before the walls. The defeat at Vienna was a turning point in the Ottoman advance into Europe. After this, they could not make any further progress on the continent. As the late 17th century entered the early 18th, the Ottoman Empire slowly stagnated and entered a relative period of decline. Much of this stemmed from the indifference of the sultans of this period. Over time, they adopted an increasingly passive approach to governance. Previously, the Ottoman government system stationed in Topkapi Palace saw active and engaged sultans, especially in the 15th and 16th centuries. They directly intervened in the affairs of the empire. However, with each generation, daily decision-making processes gradually shifted to the Grand Vizier and a small army of officials. The Grand Vizier served like a prime minister. Sultans spent their time in their harems and gardens. The governance of the empire was largely decentralized. Taxes were collected from the provinces to maintain a large army. But the regions themselves also had significant autonomy under local governors. It was also a tolerant empire. Conversion to Islam was beneficial for those looking to rise in the social hierarchy, but it was not mandatory. Christians and other religions were accepted under the Ottoman Empire. It even became a primary refuge for European Jews who faced persecution and expulsion from countries like Spain. Cities like Thessaloniki became centers of religious cosmopolitanism in the early modern era. As early as 1519, 54% of the population was Jewish. The Ottoman Empire was initially a very wealthy structure. There were extensive trade networks extending from India and China along the Silk Road to cities like Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Damascus. However, over time, the center of world economic activity shifted from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic Ocean. Large ocean-going vessels carrying trade from America and the Far East bypassed the Ottomans. Europe's dependence on the overland trade routes passing through their territory decreased. They had become dysfunctional. With this economic stagnation and imperial decline, the Ottomans began to fall behind their European rivals. The Europeans were experiencing their own scientific revolution. They were making progress on all fronts with rapid developments in technology. As the 18th century progressed, the Ottoman position began to be seen as a weakness that could be exploited rather than a threat. The lands they had conquered centuries ago now seemed ready to be reclaimed. Especially Russia and Austria launched war against against the Turks. They seized Ottoman-controlled territories on the northern shores of the Black Sea, in the Caucasus, and in the Balkans. Meanwhile, in North Africa, local governors began to show increasing levels of independence. By the end of the 18th century, Algeria, Tunisia, Tripoli, and Egypt were practically Ottoman in name only. As bad as the situation was for the Turks in the 18th century, it was overshadowed by the events of the 19th century. The Ottoman Empire came to be known as the sick man of Europe. As early as 1804, an uprising occurred in Serbia. This immediately called into question Ottoman control over the Balkans. The steady fragmentation of the empire continued over the following decades. In 1821, the Greek War of Independence broke out. This led to the emergence of an independent Greek state in 1829. The state was supported economically and militarily by Britain, France, and Russia. These powers wanted the Ottoman presence in the region to diminish for their own interests. A year later, the Ottomans' nominal sovereignty over Algeria ended completely. France invaded and began to establish its own colony. Throughout the 19th century, especially in the 1850s, Russia tried to accelerate the collapse of the empire by advancing into Ottoman territories around the Black Sea. While in previous cases Western Christian powers would have wanted to take advantage of such an opportunity and join the war against the Turks, this time Britain and France did not want the Ottoman Empire to collapse completely. Part of the reason for this was to maintain the balance of power in Europe. They did not want any nation to control too much territory or exert influence. Thereupon they joined the Crimean War in defense of the Ottoman Empire. The war was somewhat successful and brought much-needed relief to the declining power of the Turks. Nevertheless, in the 1860s, 1870s, and 1880s, numerous new countries emerged from the Ottoman provinces in the Balkans. Romania and Serbia declared their independence. Bulgaria became increasingly autonomous. The Austro-Hungarian Empire and Russia continued their relentless attacks at the expense of the Ottomans in the Balkans and the Caucasus. By the early 1910s, Italy had seized Libya and Albania had been established as an independent nation. There were growing talks among European powers about dividing up what remained of the Ottoman Empire among themselves. This never-ending period of decline led to growing concerns among the young generations of the Ottoman Empire. Many identified as Turkish nationalists and called for political reforms to mitigate the empire's decline. Perhaps they could revive expectations after 200 years of stagnation. At the forefront of this movement were the Young Turks. They wanted to replace the centuries-old government system of sultan and ministers with a modern constitutional monarchy, including a Western-style parliament and civil service. In 1908, they launched a revolution. They successfully initiated a period of constitutional government. However, the Young Turks were a loosely formed alliance of various political groups. There were liberals, academics, and more conservative elements, including the military. As a result, they could not ensure governance by consensus or agreement. From the 1908 revolution and through the years until the 1910s, the Ottoman state continued to have turbulent internal politics. This further exacerbated the collapse of the empire. Ultimately, the end of the Ottoman Empire would come from both within and without. It was inextricably linked to the outbreak of the First World War. Up to this point, the Turks had avoided getting involved with the two main military alliances that had developed among the European great powers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These were the Triple Entente powers of France, Russia, and Britain, and the Triple Alliance powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. When conflict finally broke out in the summer of 1914, the Turks saw an opportunity to push back against the advances Russia had made over the past century. Thus, they decided to join Germany as part of the Central Powers alongside Austria-Hungary and Italy. The Ottomans had mixed fortunes during the war. On the one hand, they won a great victory against British and Anzac forces during the Gallipoli campaign. But in the Middle East and Levant, they lost most of their territory to the Arab Revolt of 1916 to 1918. This revolt was instigated by British adventurer T. Lawrence. He is known as Lawrence of Arabia. There was also a much darker and more brutal aspect of Ottoman activities during the war. From 1915 onwards, the government engaged in genocidal acts against its Armenian subjects. It resulted in the deaths of an estimated 1.5 million people. Overall, the war was a disaster for the Turks. Like Germany and Austria-Hungary, it could not sustain the war effort. By 1918, the Turkish army was in collapse on numerous fronts. With the end of the First World War in late 1918, the victorious allies, Britain, France, Greece, and Italy, which had switched sides in 1916, occupied most of Turkey. They began to consider its post-war future. The Ottomans' last remaining territorial possessions in the Levant and Middle East were divided up by Britain and France. They occupied them as imperial mandates of their own empires. The Ottoman state was thus largely confined to present-day Turkey, but even its territorial integrity was soon threatened by by the claims of Greece and Italy. Greece wanted to annex the lands its people had occupied in Byzantine and ancient Greek times. Italy was seeking control of some islands like Rhodes as a form of compensation for its role in the war. All of this resulted in a revolt against the Allied occupation of Turkey in May 1919. This conflict, which would become known as the Turkish War of Independence, lasted 4 years. It resulted in the emergence of the modern Turkish state and the subsequent end of the Ottoman Empire. In the early stages of the war, the remnants of the Ottoman government in Constantinople acted together with the Allies in an effort to preserve what remained of their empire. Their opponents were Turkish nationalists, now led by former Ottoman General Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. They occupied much of the center of the country. Greek and other Allied forces campaigned into the interior, suffering extensive military losses. However, throughout 1921 and 1922, the Turkish nationalists fought back with determination. They gradually pushed the Greeks and others out of mainland Turkey. In October 1922, they effectively secured a favorable armistice. The following year, under Ataturk's leadership, the Grand National Assembly in Ankara was recognized as the legitimate Turkish government with the signing of the Treaty of Lausanne, which ratified the independence of the modern Republic of Turkey. The war officially ended. The capital was moved from Constantinople to Ankara. With that, the Ottoman Empire, which had dominated most of the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe for more than 600 years, was officially abolished and ceased to exist.